Welcome back to another episode of Local Search Tuesdays. It's a few days before Thanksgiving, so I was gonna share a few killer recipes to try out for the holiday, but I just got back from speaking at the first US version of Brighton SEO in San Diego, so I wanted to share my slides. I flew out to San Diego a few weeks ago to be a part of the first US edition of Brighton SEO, my favorite conference series. I taught the local SEO training class the day before the event and then spoke at the conference proper the next day. We're just finishing a massive 2-year research project on Google business profiles in 3 verticals, and my presentation talked through the project and some of the exciting findings. Check it out. This is lessons learned from auditing over 8,500 Google business profiles. I'm Greg Gifford. You probably know that because you're watching it on my series, but in case it's the first time you're watching, I'm the Chief Operating Officer at SearchLab. I've got an awesome weekly video series, which you're watching right now, but you can watch it every week. It's usually short 3 to 5 minute clips, but every once in a while, I'll share an entire conference presentation if it's something new and interesting to talk about. And that's a goofy picture of me speaking at MozCon a few years back. I'm lucky enough to get to speak at conferences all over the world. But unfortunately, that means sometimes I see some not so great presenters. Typically, it's a sales guy up on stage just trying to pitch their product. And they don't really have any design elements in their slides. So there's no photos, there's no graphics, there's no colors. It's just a plain white background with Arial font, and they pack every slide with bullet points. And not only is that not fun to watch, it's a scientifically proven fact that bullet points kill kittens. So today we're going to keep all the kitties safe. And as always, there's movie references, but I only had 20 minutes in this presentation, so I couldn't go back and do one movie for every year in the last 50 years. So instead, we've just got every MCU film in timeline order and every Batman movie. So you've probably seen all the movies, but in case you haven't, there is attribution over to the side. So why the long face? Are you spending too much time looking up at the competition, ranking higher, and local searches? You don't need a huge brain to succeed, even though sometimes it seems like it's magic and voodoo. Today, I've got some really hot information to share with you. Get it? Get it? I'm going to show you how to really crush the competition and kick ass in search results. Everybody talks about best practices for local SEO, and I've done it for years, but it seems like nobody really proves what they're saying works. Sure, we've got the annual local search ranking factor study, but it's based on the opinions of 40 experts. Now, sure, it's experts that are doing these things and they're filling it out based on what they've seen, but still it's not really proven facts. And far too many agencies will say that this is how local SEO works because they did something for one client. And just because you did it for one person doesn't mean it works for everybody. So we thought we'd try to use some real world data to see what's actually working or what's actually not working. So we've just finished up a massive 2-year-long research project that analyzes Google business profiles. We partnered with the guys over at Places Scout, which, by the way, if you're not doing local SEO, you need to be using Places Scout. It's amazing. And then thanks to my buddy Patrick Stocks over at Ahrefs, we partnered with them for some link analysis to gather all the data together for this study. So we pulled the data on the business profiles last fall, and then we pulled it again this fall. So part of what we're going to do in the study is to see what's changed over the last year, but most importantly, what's working right now. So we concentrated on 3 verticals. Car dealers, because that's probably the heaviest vertical that we work with. Personal injury attorneys, because personal injury attorneys tend to be the most local SEO aggressive of any vertical out there. And then cannabis dispensaries, because it's legal for recreational use in like half of the US and all of Canada, but you still can't run Google ads. So SEO is the only real digital marketing opportunity. And then we analyze the data for every site that ranked for the following queries and cities in the map pack. So you take the map pack and then you can click more locations and see everything in the local area that fits your query. We took everything that ranked for the following keywords and cities. For car dealers, we did Ford dealer, Chevy dealer, Toyota dealer, Jeep dealer, Kia dealer, and used car dealer in those 14 cities. For personal injury attorneys, we did car crash lawyer and personal injury attorney in the same cities. And for cannabis dispensaries, we did dispensary, cannabis, and marijuana in those, I stink at math, I think that's 18 or 20, I don't know, in those bunch of cities. So we ended up with 9,857 Google Business profiles and over 1.6 million data points. We're going to be releasing the full results over the course of the next several months because we're actually going to break it up into 3 different verticals and then do a comparison piece because it's just way too much to go into one big data study release. So today I wanted to share the highlights of the things that we found. So we sorted the business profiles to compare the ones that ranked at number 1 versus the ones that ranked at number 10 to see what changed and what was there. And the hypothesis was that there would be a difference between number 1 and number 10, and those differences would most likely back up the best practices that everyone has been preaching, or they would refute those practices and prove them wrong. Now, some of these elements are ranking factors, but keep in mind, some, like photos, are just conversion factors. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that correlation is causation or causation happens because of correlation or the other way around. It doesn't really matter. We're just trying to see, do the numbers back up what we would expect? So here's the good stuff. And honestly, there weren't that many surprises. In fact, the data almost always supported the local search ranking factors and just common knowledge of SEO best practices. Now, there's a ridiculous amount of data, and I only had 20 minutes in this presentation at Brighton SEO San Diego, so I'm just going to blast out some of the high points. Distance from centroid is a definite factor. For car dealers, average of 4 miles for position number 1, average of 12 miles for number 10. It's a lot tighter on the personal injury attorneys with just 0.3 of a mile versus 0.9 of a mile. And for dispensaries, about a mile versus about 5 miles. Primary category selection definitely matters. That's the number 1 factor in this year's local search ranking factor study as far as influence on local rankings. So for car dealers, if we go back and look, we ran these categories or these searches: Ford, Chevy, Toyota, Jeep, Kia, and used car dealer, which means we should probably see those 6 primary categories. But for car dealers, we actually saw 8 unique categories selected. But once we got down to 10, there were 14 unique categories selected. So they weren't picking the right ones. For attorneys, we saw only personal injury attorney selected for everyone that ranked number 1, but we saw a couple of extra categories for the guys that ranked number 10. And for dispensaries, we saw 6 unique categories versus 8 at number 10. But the additional categories that you select also matter as long as you are in a vertical where it allows you to pick multiple categories that apply, because there are 10 slots there, but it doesn't mean there's always 10 that apply to your business. For car dealers, 81% of the people at number 1 had at least 1 other category selected, so 2 categories, versus 56% that had 2 categories at position 10. But then if we're looking at 5 categories, we saw 66% at number 1 had 5 versus only 40% had 5 at number 10. And we found some interesting stuff around the number of unique categories that were selected and the relevancy of those categories in each of the verticals. For car dealers, there were 143 unique categories selected across the entire data set. At number 1, there were 42 unique categories selected, and at number 10, there were 48 unique categories selected. For personal injury attorneys, there were 27 unique categories selected versus 7 and 8, so not a whole lot there. For dispensaries, 57 unique categories selected versus 9 and 18. And we found some interesting data around the average count of photos. The average overall for car dealers was 204 photos, but we saw 297 as an average at number 1 and just 200 at number 10. And for personal injury attorneys, we saw an overall average of 55 photos, but 101 photos for number 1 on average and only 57 at number 10 on average. And for dispensaries, we saw an average photo count of 116, but 282 at number 1 versus only 80 at number 10. And vehicles for sale is a fairly new feature on a business profile. It's been around for a few years. It's a specific thing that lets car dealers display their inventory directly on their Google Business Profile, almost like it's a shopping kind of carousel on the profile. Only 13% of the dealers that ranked number 1 did not have it displayed versus nearly half of the dealers at number 10. didn't have it displayed. Now, Google does another thing with car dealers. It allows dealers to set up separate department Google business profiles for the service department and parts department. And it kind of breaks the rules of what you're typically allowed to do. Sorry for that alarm there. You're also able to set these up, even though it breaks the rules for typical eligibility. But Google understands that car dealers have a need for this because it's a different business center. So looking at separate departments, at number 1, only 42% didn't have separate departments versus number 10, 71% didn't have different departments. And we found some interesting data around the questions and answers section, which allows anybody to ask you a question and anyone to answer the question for you. For car dealers, we saw an overall average of 7 questions, but 16 average questions asked at number 1 versus 6 at number 10. Personal injury attorneys kind of broke. It was a little backwards. We saw an average of 7 questions, but only 6 at number 1 versus 9 at number 10. Dispensaries had an average of 16 questions, but 24 at number 1 and only 10 at number 10. And for all 3 verticals, we found more answers from the owners of the business on the lower ranked business profiles, which means that for the lower ranked business profiles, it seemed that the businesses were paying more attention to answering the questions than the guys up top. And Google posts are a really important factor. It's more of a conversion factor. They're basically free ads that appear on your business profile. And in the last year, we saw car dealers averaging only 7 posts at number 1 and right at 2 posts for number 2. For personal injury attorneys, basically 6 posts in the last year on average versus 3 posts in the last year at number 10. And for dispensaries, there were only 4 dispensaries that even did posts in the last year. So there wasn't enough data to really say an average there. And review count has always been assumed to be a weighted ranking factor. So for car dealers, the average review count was 1,347, but at number 1, the average was 2,381 versus number 10's average at just 1,100. For personal injury attorneys, the average is way less than this 1,347, just 195 reviews on average for personal injury attorneys, with an average of 200 at number 1 and only 91 at number 10. And for dispensaries, an average of 664 reviews overall, with 679 reviews at number 1 and 420 reviews at number 10. I know some of you out there are laughing at that. The review rating is also assumed to be a weighted ranking factor. For car dealers, we saw an overall average of 3.9, but a 4.1 at number 1 and a 3.7 at number 10. For personal injury attorneys, basically every personal injury attorney had an average rating of 4.8, so there wasn't really anything there. But for dispensaries, the overall average was 4.2, but number 1 ranked an average of 4.5, and number 10 an average of 4.1. And acquisition pace is something else that we can look at, how often these businesses are acquiring reviews. For car dealers, the overall average was 25 new reviews over the year. We saw the people at position number 1 averaging 39 reviews versus number 10 averaging only 17. Personal injury attorneys, 5 new reviews on average, 5 at number 1, only 3 at number 10. Dispensaries, 16 average reviews over the year, with 7 at number 1 and 8 at number 10. So kind of broke that one. And Yelp profiles are important for US-based businesses, since the reviews on Apple Maps come from Yelp and not from Google. And Yelp profiles are also important citations, although obviously everyone pretty much knows citations aren't as important as they used to be. Yelp is definitely an important citation site. So for car dealers, 32% of the profiles that we saw were not claimed, but only 25% were unclaimed at number 1 versus 44% at number 10. For personal injury attorneys, 26% unclaimed overall, with 20% at number 1 and 19 at number 10, so kind of broken there. Dispensaries, 28% unclaimed overall, with 24% unclaimed at number 1 and 40% unclaimed at number 10. And looking at reviews, 19 reviews on average for the year last year for car dealers, with 23 at number 1 and an average of 19 at number 10. And personal injury attorneys, a lot fewer reviews, so only about 1 for the year. But number 1 was averaging 2 reviews for the year, with an average of 0.4 reviews at number 10. And dispensaries literally doubled, 6 reviews at position 1 versus 3 at number 10. And We know that page load speed is important and that it's a ranking factor and a conversion factor, and we've known this for years. So looking at the page load speed of the landing page from the business profile, which for all of these is the home page. For car dealers, we saw an average of 4.5 second load time, but 2.6 seconds at number 1 and 4.5 at number 10. The overall average for personal injury attorney load time is 8 seconds. A huge long load time, but at position 1, it's 0.8 of a second. In position 10, 0.9 of a second. And for dispensaries, almost 8 seconds as well. So both really slow. But position number 1 averaged 1.6 seconds. And position number 10 averaged 26 seconds. So even worse than the average. And we know that being responsive is important, and it has been for a while, and it actually got added into the algorithm with the page experience update last year. For car dealers, 17% weren't responsive at position 1 versus 29% weren't responsive at position 10. For personal injury attorneys, it's basically 13% across the board, so nothing exciting there. For dispensaries, 12% not responsive at position 1 and 14% not responsive at position 10. Schema markup is also something that's generally agreed to be important. It's been around for years and it's been proven to be influential. For car dealers at position 1, about 50% don't have schema. At position 10, 60% don't. For personal injury attorneys, though, 33% don't have schema at position 1 versus 75% don't have schema at position 10. And dispensaries, it's backwards. We've got more dispensaries without schema at position 1 than at position 10. Now, best practices have always dictated that you should optimize around your targeted keyword in the page content. So do we have the keyword in the landing page, which is the homepage of the website? For car dealers, only 60% included the keyword that we were targeting versus only 33% at position 10. For attorneys, kind of broken, a little bit backwards. 67% at number 1 have the keyword versus 69% at number 10 have the keyword. And for dispensaries, 76% include the keyword at position 1 and only 71% include the keyword at position 10. And word count has been a long debate. You get all these people that say you gotta have 1,500 words if you want to rank number 1, blah, 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 but it's different per vertical and people don't talk about that. And it's often misinterpreted. So we looked at the average number of non-stop words. So stop words being a, an, of, the. So we're not looking at those. We're just looking at total word count. For car dealers, an average of 871 words for the first position and an average of 783 words for the 10th position. For attorneys, 1,500 words on average for pack number 1 and 1,421 for average on number 10. Kind of weird that it averaged out at exactly 1,500 for number 1. Clearly those guys are reading those blog posts that say, you need 1,500 to rank. And dispensaries kind of broke it. Dispensaries not really doing SEO, honestly, and we've seen that across the board. Average of only 362 words on the homepage of a dispensary website, but 384 for number 1, and actually more words for number 10. And we know that inbound links have been a weighted factor for years. So let's look at that. For car dealers, we saw an average of 13,000 inbound links per GBP or per website. But we see at number 1, only 3,500 links. And at number 10, 5,000 links. And it just continues to go up beyond that. It's almost like car dealers think that links are a silver bullet. And if they're not ranking well, they're going to go after a bunch of links. Same thing for attorneys. Not really. I mean, there's a difference of 1 link when we're looking at position 1 versus position 10. And again, look here, the overall average is 21,000 versus the 15,000 here. So clearly the guys that are lower are trying to get more links. And same thing with dispensaries, an average of 17,000 links, but about 8,000 for pack number 1 and pack number 10. But we also know that it's not just the number of links, it's the number of unique linking domains. But guess what? There wasn't really anything there either. So there's more that we're digging into when we release the full study. You'll see that stuff. So none of this was really that shocking, but the data proves that the best practices that we all have been talking about for years are mostly correct. But keep in mind, there's never a silver bullet. You can't pick just one thing to have influence, but every little bit helps. So do everything you can across the board and get everything as right as possible to beat the average. And chances are you're going to win in the search results. Thanks for sitting through that fire hose of information. Hopefully now you won't be down and depressed because you got all those hot tips. You'll no longer be the underdog in search results, and everyone will be super happy. There's my email address. Thanks for watching today. There is a list of all the movies at the end, but it's a shorter list because it was a short presentation. So you probably saw most of those anyway. So again, email me if you've got questions, and pay attention. We're going to be releasing the full results of this study over the next few months. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking around to watch the whole thing. Interesting stuff, right? That's definitely all the time we've got left for this week's episode, so you know what that means. Put your hand on the screen right here. We totally just high-fived because you learned something awesome. Enjoy your Thanksgiving weekend, and we'll see you again next week for another episode of Local Search Tuesdays.